Hello, everyone. I know many of you listen while falling asleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. The summer of 2021 felt like a breath of fresh air for many Americans. After more than a year of pandemic restrictions, lockdowns, and isolation, people were finally beginning to venture out again. Roads that had been eerily quiet were now filled with travelers. National parks that had stood empty were welcoming visitors back. Young couples were loading up vans and cars, chasing the open road, documenting their adventures on social media, and embracing a lifestyle that promised freedom, beauty, and endless possibilities. Among those couples was a young woman named Gabby Petito. She was 22 years old, bright-eyed, full of dreams, and deeply in love with the idea of exploring America's most stunning landscapes. Gabby wasn't just traveling for herself. She was building something bigger. She wanted to share her journey with the world, to inspire others, to show them that life could be an adventure if you were brave enough to chase it. She had a growing social media presence. A white Ford Transit van that she and her fiancé had converted into a cozy mobile home, and a route planned across some of the most beautiful terrain the United States had to offer. Her Instagram feed was filled with images of golden sunsets, desert vistas, towering red rocks, and candid moments of joy. In one photo, she stood barefoot in a field of wildflowers, her arms stretched wide, her smile radiant. In another, she posed in front of a mural in a small town, her eyes sparkling with excitement. To her followers, Gabby Petito was living the dream. She was young, adventurous, and seemingly happy. But beneath the carefully curated images and cheerful captions, something was quietly unraveling. On September 11, 2021, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, reported her daughter missing. The last time Nicole had heard from Gabby was late August. The last text message she received was brief, strange, and unsettling. It didn't sound like Gabby. It didn't feel right. And when days passed without any further contact, Nicole's worry turned into fear, and that fear turned into action. What followed was one of the most highly publicized missing persons cases in recent American history. It was a case that gripped the nation, dominated news cycles, sparked fierce debates about media coverage, and ultimately ended in heartbreak. But it also became a case that exposed truths about relationships, warning signs, and the dangers that can lurk behind even the most picture-perfect fad-aids. This is the story of Gabby Petito, a young woman who set out on a cross-country adventure and never came home. Gabrielle Venera Petito was born on March 19, 1999 in Blue Point, New York, a small hamlet on Long Island. She grew up in a loving, blended family. Her mother, Nicole Schmidt, and her stepfather, Jim Schmidt, provided a stable and supportive home. Her biological father, Joe Petito, and his wife, Tara Petito, were also deeply involved in her life. Gabby had siblings she adored, and she was known within her family as a sweet, creative, and compassionate young woman. From an early age, Gabby showed a love for art and self-expression. She enjoyed drawing, painting, and experimenting with different creative outlets. She was also someone who cared deeply about others. Friends and family described as empathetic, kind-hearted, and always willing to lend a hand or offer a word of encouragement. She had a smile that could light up a room, and a laugh that was contagious. As she grew older, Gabby's interests expanded. She became fascinated with travel, with the idea of seeing the world beyond the familiar streets of Long Island. She spent hours on social media, scrolling through photos of van life adventurers, digital nomads, and young people who had chosen to live unconventionally. She dreamed of doing the same. She wanted to visit national parks, sleep under the stars, wake up in new places, and document it all. She wanted to inspire others to live freely, to chase their dreams, and to not be afraid of the unknown. In high school, Gabby met a boy named Brian Laundrie. He was from Northport, Florida, but their paths crossed through mutual friends and social circles. They quickly became inseparable. Brian shared Gabby's love for the outdoors, for adventure, for living outside the norms of traditional society. They both dreamed of a life on the road. They talked about converting a van, traveling across the country, and building a life that was entirely their own. Their relationship seemed from the outside like a modern fairy tale. They were young, love, and planning a future together. In 2020, Brian proposed, and Gabby said yes. They became engaged and their plans for the cross-country road trip became more concrete. They found a white 2012 Ford Transit van, and together they transformed it into a tiny home on wheels. They installed a bed, storage, lighting, and all the essentials they would need for life on the road. Gabby decorated the interior with plants, fairy lights, and personal touches that made the van feel warm and inviting. She launched a YouTube channel and an Instagram account dedicated to their journey. She called it Nomadic Static, a name that reflected the paradox of their lifestyle, constantly moving, yet seeking moments of stillness and peace. She posted videos and photos of their preparations, their excitement, and their hopes for what lay ahead. Her followers grew. People were captivated by her energy, her aesthetic, and her authenticity. On July 2, 2021, Gabby and Brian set off from New York. Their plan was ambitious. They would drive across the United States, visiting national parks, camping in remote areas, and documenting everything along the way. They would hit spots like Arches National Park, Zion Yellowstone, and the Grand Tetons. They would chase sunsets, hike through canyons, and live the kind of life that most people only dream about. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Gabby posted regularly photos from Kansas, Colorado, Utah. She shared images of herself standing in front of massive rock formations, walking through desert trails, sitting by campfires. Her captions were poetic and reflective. She wrote about freedom, gratitude, and the beauty of the natural world. Her followers responded with enthusiasm, encouraging her, telling her how much they admired her courage and spirit. But those who looked closely, those who paid attention to the subtle details, might have noticed that something was beginning to shift. In some of the photos, Gabby's smile seemed forced. In some of the videos, her voice sounded strained. There were moments where she appeared withdrawn, distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. And in the background of some images, Brian could be seen silent, unsmiling, his body language tense. Still, these were small things, easy to dismiss. On August 12, 2021, something happened that should have been a warning. Something that in hindsight was a glaring red flag. Gabby and Brian were in Moab, Utah, a small desert town known for its proximity to Arches National Park. It was a popular stop for travelers, a place where adventurers gathered to explore red rock canyons and surreal landscapes. On that day, a 911 call came to the Grand County Sheriff's Office. The caller reported seeing a man slapping a woman near a van. The caller described the man as aggressive, and the woman as distressed. Officers from the Moab City Police Department responded. They located the white Ford Transit van and pulled it over. Inside were Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. What happened next was captured on police body camera footage that would later be analyzed, dissected, and debated by millions of people around the world. When the officers approached, Gabby was visibly upset. She was crying, hyperventilating, her hands shaking. She struggled to speak clearly, her words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. She apologized repeatedly. She blamed herself. She said she had been trying to get Brian to calm down. She said she had hit him first. She said she suffered from anxiety and OCD, and that she had been having a bad day. Brian, on the other hand, was calm. He was collected, articulate, and cooperative. He smiled at the officers. He joked with them. He explained that Gabby had been stressed, that she had grabbed the steering wheel while he was driving, that he had tried to lock her out of the van to give her space to cool down. He had scratches on his face and arms, scratches that Gabby admitted to causing. The officers separated them and conducted individual interviews. They tried to assess the situation. Was this a case of domestic violence? If so, who was the aggressor? The physical evidence, the scratches on Brian's face, seemed to point to Gabby, but her emotional state, her fear, her frantic energy told a different story. One of the officers noted that Gabby exhibited signs of a mental health crisis. Another officer suggested that the couple simply needed to spend the night apart to de-escalate the situation. Ultimately, the officers determined that this was not a case that required arrest. They classified the incident as a mental health break, rather than domestic violence. They arranged for Brian to stay in a hotel for the night, while Gabby stayed in the van. The officers were kind to both of them. They offered words of encouragement. They told them to take care of each other. They gave them resources for mental health support. And then they let them go. The body cam footage would later be released to the public. And when people watched it, when they saw Gabby's tears, her trembling hands, her self-blame, they recognized something the officers hadn't fully grasped in the moment. They saw a young woman in distress. They saw a pattern. They saw the signs of something darker. But in that moment, on that hot August day in Moab, the incident was closed. Gabby and Brian were free to continue their journey. And they did. Over the next 2 weeks, Gabby's social media activity became sporadic. She posted a photo on August 13, the day after the Moab incident. It showed her holding a small pumpkin, smiling in front of a mural. The caption read, "Happy Halloween." It was August. The caption felt off. On August 19, she posted another photo. This one showed her standing in front of a butterfly mural in Ogden, Utah. Her smile was there, but something in her eyes seemed hollow. On August 25, she posted what would be her final Instagram photo. It was a shot of her hands holding a small crocheted pumpkin, with a van visible in the blurred background. Again, it was late August. Again, the timing felt strange. That same day, Gabby's mother received a text message from Gabby's phone. It read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Nicole found this message odd. Gabby never referred to her grandfather as Stan. She always called him by a more affectionate name. The phrasing felt wrong. But at the time, Nicole didn't think too much of it. She assumed Gabby was just stressed or distracted. On August 27, Nicole received another text. This one simply said, "No service in Yosemite." But Gabby wasn't supposed to be in Yosemite. Her planned route didn't include Yosemite National Park at that time. And the message was brief, devoid of any personal warmth or detail. It didn't sound like Gabby. Nicole tried calling. No answer. She tried texting. No response. Days passed. Silence. By early September, Nicole's concern had escalated into alarm. She reached out to Brian's family, the Laundries, who lived in Northport, Florida. She asked if they had heard from Gabby. She asked if Brian had any information. The response she got was cold. The Laundries told her to contact their lawyer. They offered no information, no reassurance, no help. On September 5, 2021, Brian Laundrie returned to Northport, Florida alone. He drove Gabby's white Ford Transit van back to his parents' house. He did not report Gabby missing. He did not contact her family. He did not offer any explanation for where she was or why he had returned without her. He simply came home, parked the van, and stayed silent for 10 days. Brian Laundrie said nothing. He went about his life as if nothing was wrong. He went on a camping trip with his family. He mowed the lawn. He went for bike rides. He acted, by all appearances, completely normal. Meanwhile, Gabby's family was frantic. They called. They texted. They pleaded for information. They begged Brian and his family to help them find Gabby. They got nothing in return. On September 11, 2021, Nicole Schmidt filed an official missing persons report with the Suffolk County Police Department in New York. Gabby Petito was officially listed as missing. The case was then transferred to the Northport Police Department in Florida, since that was where Brian Laundrie, the last known person to see Gabby alive, was residing. The police went to the Laundrie home. They asked to speak with Brian. The Laundrie's attorney, Stephen Bertolino, released a statement on behalf of the family. It read in part, "On the advice of counsel, the Laundrie family is remaining in the background and will have no further comment." Brian refused to speak to investigators. He invoked his right to remain silent. And while that was his legal right, to Gabby's family and to the public, his silence was damning. The case exploded into the national spotlight almost immediately. News outlets picked up the story. Social media erupted. The hashtag #FindGabby began trending. People shared her photos, her videos, her story. They demanded answers. They pressured law enforcement to act. They called Brian a coward, a suspect, a murderer, even though at that point no crime had been officially confirmed. The case became a media sensation. It sparked conversations about domestic violence, about the way missing persons cases are covered, about the disparities in media attention given to missing white women versus missing women of color, a phenomenon that had come to be known as missing white woman syndrome. But amidst all the debate and discussion, one thing was clear: Gabby Petito was missing. and Brian Laundrie wasn't talking. On September 14, 2021, Brian Laundrie himself was reported missing by his parents. They claimed he had gone for a hike in the Carlton Reserve, vast, swampy wilderness area near their home, and had not returned. The timing was suspicious. The circumstances were baffling. The man who was the key to finding Gabby had now vanished as well. The case had taken yet another dark turn. The search for Gabby intensified. Law enforcement agencies, volunteer groups, and online sleuths began combing through full information. They analyzed her social media posts. Looking for clues, they studied the timeline of her trip. They reviewed the body cam footage from Moab. They tracked her last known locations. And then a couple from Florida, who had been traveling through Wyoming in late August, came forward with crucial information. They had dash cam footage from their trip. On August 27, the same day Gabby's mother received the cryptic, "No service in Yosemite" text, the couple's dash cam had captured a white Ford Transit van parked in a remote area near Grand Teton National Park. The van was parked along a dirt road near Spread Creek, a dispersed camping area popular with travelers seeking solitude. The footage was grainy, but the van matched the description of Gabby's vehicle. Investigators immediately shifted their focus to that area. Search teams were deployed. The terrain was rough, dense forest, steep hills, cold streams, but on September 19, 2021, the search came to a tragic end. Human remains were discovered in the Spread Creek area, near a campsite. The body was found in a remote, wooded location, not far from where the van had been spotted on the dashcam footage. The remains were later confirmed through dental records to be those of Gabby Petito. She was 22 years old. She had been missing for weeks, and now she was gone. The Teton County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy. On September 20, 2021, the coroner announced the results. Gabby Petito's death had been ruled a homicide. The manner of death was determined to be strangulation. She had been killed by manual force to the neck. The news devastated her family. It shattered the hearts of those who had been hoping, praying, that somehow she would be found alive. It confirmed what many had already feared. Gabby Petito had been murdered, and the prime suspect was nowhere to be found. Brian Laundrie had disappeared into the wilderness. The Carlton Reserve, where his parents claimed he had gone hiking, was a 25,000-acre expanse of swamps, forests, and wetlands. It was home to alligators, snakes, and dense, nearly impenetrable vegetation. Searching it was a monumental task. The FBI took over the case. A federal arrest warrant was issued for Brian Laundrie, not for murder, but for unauthorized use of a debit card. Between August 30 and September 1, someone had used Gabby's debit card to withdraw over $100,000. Authorities believed that person was Brian. The warrant gave law enforcement the legal grounds to pursue him. But finding him was another matter. Massive search efforts were launched in the Carlton Reserve. Divers, helicopters, drones, search dogs, and specialized teams conned the area. Days turned into weeks. There was no sign of him. Meanwhile, the public's obsession with the case only grew. Gabby's story was everywhere. Her face was on every news channel, every social media feed, every newspaper. People analyzed every detail, every clue, every piece of evidence. Some became amateur detectives, piecing together timelines and theories. Others simply mourned a young life lost too soon. Gabby's family held a press conference. Her father, Joe Petito, spoke through tears. He described his daughter as a light, a beautiful soul, a young woman who wanted nothing more than to share her love of life with others. He thanked the public for their support. He pleaded for anyone with information to come forward, and he vowed to get justice for Gabby. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, also spoke. Her voice was steady, but her pain was palpable. She talked about the last time she saw Gabby, the last conversations they had, the dreams Gabby had for the future. She said that Gabby didn't deserve what happened to her. No one did. The Petito and Schmidt families launched the Gabby Petito Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping families of missing persons and raising awareness about domestic violence. They wanted Gabby's story to mean something. They wanted her death to lead to change. As the search for Brian continued, new details began to emerge about the relationship between Gabby and Brian. Friends and acquaintances came forward with stories that painted a troubling picture. Some said that Brian could be controlling, that he didn't like Gabby spending time with her friends, that he would get jealous easily, that he sometimes belittled her in front of others. One friend recalled a time when Gabby had confided that Brian had episodes where he would hear voices and become paranoid. Another remembered Gabby saying that Brian would sometimes take her phone and read her messages. But Gabby had also defended him. She loved him. She believed in him. She thought they could work through their problems. She thought the road trip would bring them closer together. Instead, it ended her life. The Moab body cam footage was watched and re-watched by experts in domestic violence. They pointed out the classic signs: Gabby's self-blame, her anxiety, her fear of being a burden, her desperate need to take responsibility for the conflict. They noted Brian's calmness, his charm with the officers, his ability to control the narrative. These were, they said, red flags, warning signs of an abusive relationship. And yet, in the moment, the officers had missed them. Not out of malice, but out of lack of training, a lack of awareness. The system had failed Gabby. On October 20, 2021, after weeks of searching, human remains were discovered in the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, an area adjacent to the Calton Reserve. Personal items belonging to Brian Laundrie were found nearby, a backpack and a notebook. The remains were later confirmed through dental records to be those of Brian Laundrie. He had been dead for weeks. The exact cause of death was later determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He had taken his own life. The discovery brought an end to the manhunt, but it also closed the door on ever getting full answers. Brian would never be arrested. He would never stand trial. He would never be forced to explain what happened in those final moments of Gabby's life. But the notebook he left behind would provide some answers. In the weeks following the discovery of Brian's remains, the FBI worked to recover and analyze the contents of the notebook. Much of it was damaged by water and exposure to the elements, but portions were still legible. In January 2022, the FBI released a statement confirming that Brian Laundrie had admitted in writing to killing Gabby Petito. In the notebook, Brian claimed that Gabby had been injured, that she had fallen or hurt herself in some way, and that he had killed her to end her suffering. He portrayed it as an act of mercy, but investigators did not believe his account. The autopsy had shown that Gabby died from manual strangulation, a violent and deliberate act that takes sustained pressure and intent. There was no evidence of the kind of catastrophic injury that would require mercy killing. What the notebook revealed instead was a final attempt by Brian Laundrie to control the narrative. Even in death, he sought to paint himself as something other than what he was: a man who murdered the woman he claimed to love. The case was officially closed. Gabby Petito had been killed by Brian Laundrie. He had strangled her to death in a remote area of Wyoming. He had left her body in the wilderness. He had driven her van back to Florida. He had stayed silent while her family begged for answers. And then, when the walls began to close in, he had fled into a swamp and taken his own life. But the story of Gabby Petito didn't end there. Her story became a catalyst for change, a rallying cry for victims of domestic violence, and a somber reminder of how easily warning signs can be overlooked. In the months and years that followed her death, Gabby's case sparked crucial conversations about the systems meant to protect vulnerable people, and how those systems so often fail. But before we dive deeper into the aftermath and the broader implications of this tragedy, we need to go back. We need to understand the timeline in greater detail. We need to walk through those final weeks of Gabby's life, piecing together the fragments of evidence, witness accounts, and digital breadcrumbs that investigators used to reconstruct what happened. Because the truth is, Gabby left behind clues. Some were intentional, others were unintentional. But together, they painted a picture of a relationship spiraling into darkness, of a young woman trying desperately to hold things together, and of a man whose actions in those final days revealed something deeply disturbing. The road trip had begun with hope, with excitement, with the promise of adventure. Gabby and Brian left New York on July 2, 2021, in the white Ford Transit van that they had spent months preparing. The van was their home, their sanctuary, their ticket to freedom. Inside, it was cozy and thoughtfully designed. Gabby had hung fairy lights along the ceiling. There were plants in small pots, colorful blankets, and storage bins neatly organized with their belongings. A small bed took up the back section just big enough for the two of them. It was cramped, but it was theirs. Their first stops were unremarkable but filled with the enthusiasm of a journey just beginning. They drove through Pennsylvania, stopping to take photos at scenic overlooks. They passed through Ohio, where Gabby posted a picture of herself smiling in front of a rest stop. They made their way to Colorado, camping in the Rockies, hiking through forests, and marveling at the mountain vistas. Gabby documented everything. She posted photos on Instagram, uploaded videos to YouTube, and shared snippets of their journey with her growing number of followers. In one video, she and Brian talked about their plans for the trip. They seemed excited, optimistic, and deeply in love. Brian spoke about wanting to live simply, to disconnect from the chaos of modern life. Gabby talked about wanting to inspire others, to show people that they didn't need much to be happy. But even in those early days, there were small tensions. In one YouTube video, Gabby mentioned that she and Brian had different ideas about how to manage their social media presence. She wanted to post frequently, to engage with followers, to build something meaningful. Brian, she said, was less interested in that. He preferred to stay off camera, to keep things private. It was a small disagreement, the kind that any couple might have, but it hinted at a deeper conflict, a difference in priorities, in goals, in how they each saw their future. As they continued west, the landscape changed. The green forests of Colorado gave way to the red deserts of Utah. They arrived in Moab in early August, planning to spend time exploring Arches National Park and the surrounding areas. Moab is a small town, a haven for rock climbers, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts. It's a place where people come to escape, to disconnect, to immerse themselves in the raw beauty of the desert. But for Gabby and Brian, Moab would become the site of the first major crack in the facade of their picture-perfect trip. On August 12, the day of the police encounter, tensions between Gabby and Brian had been building. According to Gabby's own account to the officers, they had been arguing about her obsessive-compulsive tendencies. She said she had been trying to organize things in the van, and that Brian had gotten frustrated with her. She said she had been stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed. But there was more to the story. Witnesses reported seeing Brian and Gabby arguing outside a local co-op earlier that day. One witness said Brian appeared to be trying to lock Gabby out of the van. Another said they saw him grab her face aggressively. It was this witness who called 911, reporting that they had seen a man hitting a woman. When the police arrived and pulled over the van, they found Gabby in the state we've already described, crying, hyperventilating, blaming herself. Brian, meanwhile, was calm and composed. He told the officers that Gabby had been having a rough day, that she struggled with anxiety, and that he had been trying to create space between them to let her cool down. The officers interviewed both of them separately. In her interview, Gabby repeatedly apologized. She said she had hit Brian first. She said she had grabbed the steering wheel while he was driving, because she was afraid he was going to leave her in Moab without the van. She said she had scratched his face and arms during the struggle. Brian's account aligned with Gabby's in most respects, but he framed himself as the victim. He showed the officers the scratches on his face and arms. He explained that he had tried to de-escalate the situation by locking Gabby out of the van, giving her time to calm down. He said he loved her, that he just wanted things to be okay. The officers were sympathetic to both of them. They saw a young couple struggling under the stress of living in close quarters, dealing with mental health issues, and navigating the challenges of a long road trip. They didn't see evidence of a crime that warranted arrest. Instead, they saw two people who needed a break from each other. One of the officers even offered advice. He told Brian to be patient with Gabby, to understand that anxiety can make people act in ways they don't mean. He told Gabby to take care of herself, to breathe, to try to relax, and then they let them go. The decision not to arrest anyone that day has been scrutinized extensively. Experts in domestic violence have pointed out that the dynamics observed during the stop, Gabby's self-blame, her visible distress, Brian's calmness and control of the narrative, are classic signs of an abusive relationship. They argue that Gabby was experiencing what's known as reactive abuse, where a victim enduring prolonged emotional or psychological abuse lashes out in self-defense or out of desperation. The abuser then uses that reaction to paint the victim as the aggressor. In Gabby's case, she admitted to hitting Brian first. But why? Because she was afraid. She was afraid he would abandon her in the middle of nowhere. She was afraid of losing the van, which was her only means of shelter and transportation. She was afraid of being alone. Brian, on the other hand, showed no fear. He showed no signs of being a victim. He was in control, but the officers, who were not specifically trained to recognize these patterns, took the situation at face value. They saw scratches on Brian's face and assumed he was the victim. They saw Gabby's emotional breakdown and assumed she was unstable. They made Brian stay in a hotel for the night. Gabby stayed in the van. The next morning, they were free to continue their journey together. Looking back, this was a pivotal moment. A moment where intervention could have changed everything. A moment where Gabby could have been separated from Brian, given resources, encouraged to go home. But that didn't happen, and the trip continued. After the Moab incident, Gabby and Brian spent a few more days in the area. They visited Arches National Park. Gabby posted photos. On the surface, things seemed to return to normal. But those who knew her later said that she seemed different after Moab. Quieter, more withdrawn. On August 13, the day after the police encounter, Gabby posted the photo of herself holding a small pumpkin, smiling in front of a mural. The caption read, "Happy Halloween." It was mid-August. The caption was odd, out of place. Some people later speculated that Brian had posted it, not Gabby. But there's no way to know for sure. On August 17, Gabby and Brian checked into a hotel in Salt Lake City. They stayed there for several days. During that time, Brian flew back to Florida. The reason for the trip has been a subject of much speculation. Brian's family later claimed that he returned to help move their belongings out of a storage unit. But the timing was strange. Why leave in the middle of a cross-country trip? Why spend money on a last-minute flight? Some have theorized that Brian left because the relationship was fracturing, and he needed space. Others have suggested that something happened in Salt Lake City. Another fight, another incident that prompted his temporary departure. Whatever the reason, Brian flew back to Florida on August 17, returned to Utah on August 23. Gabby stayed in the hotel alone during that time. She didn't go home. She didn't reach out to her family with concerns. She waited for him to come back. When Brian returned, they resumed their journey. They left Salt Lake City and headed north toward Wyoming, toward the Grand Tetons, toward what should have been one of the most beautiful legs of their trip. But this is where the timeline becomes critical. This is where every detail matters. Because this is the period during which Gabby Pito was killed. On August 24, Gabby and Brian were seen at a restaurant called Mary Piglet's in Jackson, Wyoming. A witness, a server at the restaurant, later came forward with a disturbing account of their interaction. The server said that Brian was acting aggressively toward Gabby. He was speaking to her in a harsh, demeaning tone. He was being rude to the staff as well, snapping at the server and making the entire interaction uncomfortable. Gabby, the server recalled, seemed embarrassed. She apologized for Brian's behavior. She seemed upset, but she tried to keep things calm. The server's account was significant. It suggested that by late August, whatever tensions had been simmering beneath the surface of the relationship had boiled over. Brian was no longer just frustrated. He was openly hostile. On August 25, Gabby posted her final Instagram photo, the one of her hands holding the crocheted pumpkin. That same day, her mother received the text message that read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Nicole Schmidt found the message strange. Gabby never called her grandfather Stan. It was out of character. But at the time, she didn't panic. She thought maybe Gabby was just distracted or busy. On August 27, Nicole received the final text. No service in Yosemite, but Gabby wasn't supposed to be in Yosemite. The message made no sense, and after that there was no more text, no more calls, no more posts, silence. Investigators later determined that Gabby's phone stopped all activity on August 27. It was the last day she was seen alive by independent witnesses. The last day her digital footprint existed. So what happened between August 25 and August 27? The answer lies in the remote wilderness near Spread Creek in Grand Teton National Park. Spread Creek is a dispersed camping area, meaning there are no designated campsites, no amenities, and no park rangers regularly patrolling the area. It's a place where people go to get away from crowds, to camp in solitude, to experience nature without the constraints of developed campgrounds. It's also isolated, remote, the kind of place where you could be alone for days without seeing another soul. Investigators believe that Gabby and Brian drove to Spread Creek on or around August 27. They parked the van along a dirt road, in a spot that was hidden from the main path but still accessible by vehicle. And it was here in this quiet, isolated place that Brian Laundrie killed Gabby Petito. The exact details of what happened will never be fully known. Brian is dead. Gabby can't speak. The only account we have is the physical evidence in Brian's own written confession. A confession that investigators do not believe tells the whole truth. What we know for certain is this: Gabby died from manual strangulation. This means that someone placed their hands around her neck and applied sustained pressure until she lost consciousness and died. Strangulation is not a quick death. It's not accidental. It requires intent. It requires force. It requires the killer to maintain pressure for several minutes while the victim struggles, gasps, and fights for breath. It is an intimate and brutal way to kill someone. The coroner's report indicated that Gabby had been dead for approximately 3 to 4 weeks when her body was discovered on September 19. This timeline aligns with the late August dates when she stopped communicating with her family. Her body was found in a wooded area, not far from where the van had been parked. She had been left outdoors, exposed to the elements. Investigators have not released all the details of the condition of her remains out of respect for her family, but they confirmed that the cause of death was homicide by strangulation. There were no signs that anyone else had been involved, no evidence of a random attacker, no indication that this was a crime of opportunity committed by a stranger. All the evidence pointed to one person: Brian Laundrie. After killing Gabby, Brian did not call for help. He did not report her death. He did not stay with her body. Instead, he left her there alone in the wilderness, and he began to cover his tracks. On August 29, 2 days after Gabby's last known communication, a couple on a camping trip near Spread Creek reported seeing a young man acting strangely. The man was alone, and he appeared to be hitchhiking. He approached their vehicle and asked for a ride. The couple agreed to give him a lift. The man introduced himself as Brian. He said he had been camping with his fiancée, but that she was back at their campsite working on their social media content. He said he needed a ride to Jackson, Wyoming. But then Brian suddenly became agitated. He said he needed to get out of the car. He said he had made a mistake, that he actually needed to go in the opposite direction. The couple pulled over, confused, and Brian got out. He thanked them and walked off into the wilderness. The couple thought the encounter was odd, but they didn't think much of it at the time. It was only later, after Gabby was reported missing, that they realized the significance of what they had witnessed. Another witness came forward with a similar story. A young woman named Miranda Baker reported that on August 29, she and her boyfriend had picked up a hitchhiker near Coulter Bay in Grand Teton National Park. The hitchhiker was a young man who said his name was Brian. He offered them $200 for a short ride, an unusually large amount of money for such a brief trip. During the ride, Brian talked about camping with his fiancée. But then, when Miranda mentioned they were heading to Jackson, Brian became agitated. He said he needed to get out immediately. He insisted they pull over, even though they were in the middle of nowhere. Miranda and her boyfriend obliged, and Brian jumped out and walked away. Miranda later said that the encounter felt strange. Brian's behavior was erratic. His story didn't quite add up, and the fact that he offered so much money for such a short ride seemed desperate. Investigators believe that Brian was trying to create distance between himself and the Spread Creek area. He was trying to establish an alibi, to make it seem like he had been somewhere else. But his panicked behavior, his sudden change of mind, suggested that he was disoriented, paranoid, and unraveling. By August 30, Brian was back at the Spread Creek area. Witnesses reported seeing the white Ford Transit van still parked there. But by September 1, the van was gone. Because on September 1, Brian Laundrie drove Gabby's van all the way back to Florida alone. The drive from Wyoming to Florida is approximately 400 miles. It takes roughly 36 hours of driving, not including stops for gas, food, or rest. Brian made that drive by himself, in the van that he and Gabby had converted together, knowing that Gabby's body was lying in the wilderness behind him. He didn't call her family. He didn't call the police. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. He just drove. On September 1, Brian arrived at his parents' house in North Florida. He parked the van in the driveway. He went inside, and he said nothing for the next 10 days while Gabby's family frantically searched for answers. He lawyered up immediately. His parents lawyered up. They refused to cooperate with investigators. They refused to answer questions. Gabby's mother called the Laundrie home, begging for information. She texted, he pleaded. She got no response. Gabby's father did the same. He called Brian directly. No answer. They contacted the Northport police. The police went to the Laundrie home and asked to speak with Brian. The Laundrie's attorney, Stephen Bertolino, released a statement saying that the family would not be making any comments. Legally, Brian had every right to remain silent. The Fifth Amendment protects individuals from self-incrimination. But morally, ethically, his silence was a betrayal. Gabby's family deserved answers. They deserved to know where their daughter was, whether she was safe, what had happened. But Brian gave them nothing. On September 11, 2021, Gabby was officially reported missing. The case went public, and the media frenzy began within hours. Gabby's face was everywhere. News outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded. People shared her photos, her last known whereabouts. They demanded answers. They called for Brian to speak. They flooded the Northport Police Department with tips, theories, and pleas for action. The pressure on Brian and his family was immense. Protesters gathered outside the Laundrie home. News vans parked on the street. Reporters shouted questions every time someone entered or left the house. And still, Brian said nothing. On September 13, police executed a search warrant on the Laundrie home and seized the van. Forensic teams combed through it looking for evidence. They found Gabby's personal belongings. They found traces of her presence. But they also found something else, evidence that would later be used to issue a federal warrant for Brian's arrest. Between August 30 and September 1, the days immediately following Gabby's death, someone had used Gabby's Capital One debit card to make unauthorized withdrawals and purchases totaling over $30,000. Investigators believe that person was Brian Laundrie. Using a deceased person's debit card without authorization is a federal crime. It gave law enforcement the legal grounds to issue a warrant for Brian's arrest. But by the time the warrant was issued, Brian was already gone. On September 14, Brian's parents reported that he had left home on September 13 to go hiking in the Carlton Reserve and had not returned. They said he had taken a backpack with him and had left his cell phone and wallet at home. The timing was suspicious. Just as the walls were closing in, just as law enforcement was preparing to arrest him, Brian disappeared. The Carlton Reserve is a massive, swampy wilderness area. It's 25,000 acres of dense vegetation, standing water, alligators, and venomous snakes. It's not the kind of place where someone can easily survive for long without proper supplies. And it's not the kind of place where someone can be easily found. A massive search operation was launched. The FBI, local law enforcement, search and rescue teams, K-9 units, helicopters, and divers all descended on the reserve. They searched for days, then weeks. There was no sign of Brian Laundrie. Meanwhile, the search for Gabby continued. Investigators had narrowed their focus to the Grand Teton area, based on the dashcam footage and witness accounts. On September 19, a search team discovered human remains in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area. The body was found in a remote, wooded location. It was partially concealed but not buried. Gabby had been left there alone for weeks. The Teton County coroner confirmed the identity through dental records. It was Gabby Petito. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. The cause of death was manual strangulation. The confirmation devastated her family. Her father, Joe Petito, released a statement thanking everyone who had helped search for Gabby. He said that while they had hoped for a different outcome, they were grateful to finally have answers. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother spoke to the press. She was heartbroken but determined. She said that Gabby's death would not be in vain. She vowed to fight for other victims of domestic violence, to raise awareness, to prevent other families from experiencing the same pain. The FBI officially named Brian Laundrie as a person of interest in Gabby's death. But they still couldn't find him. The search of the Carlton Reserve continued. Days turned into weeks. The public grew frustrated. How could someone enforcement not find him? Theories abounded. Some people believed Brian was alive and hiding, possibly with help from his family. Others believed he was dead, that he had succumbed to the harsh conditions of the reserve, or had taken his own life. And then, on October 20, 2021, the search came to an end. Human remains were discovered in the Miakahatchee Creek Environmental Park, an area adjacent to the Carlton Reserve. The discovery was made in a section of the park that had previously been underwater due to flooding, but had recently become accessible as water levels receded. Brian's parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, had actually been the ones to find some of the initial items. They had gone to the park that morning to assist in the search, and within minutes of arriving, they located a white bag and a dark object that turned out to be Brian's backpack. Law enforcement was immediately notified, and a more thorough search of the area was conducted. Not far from where the backpack was found, investigators discovered human remains. They were skeletal, scattered, and partially submerged in water. The condition of the remains suggested they had been there for several weeks, exposed to the elements, wildlife, and the swampy environment. Personal items were also recovered from the scene. In addition to the backpack, investigators found a notebook. The notebook was waterlogged, damaged, but not completely destroyed. It would prove to be crucial evidence. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office. Dental records were used to confirm the identity. On October 21, 2021, the remains belonged to Brian Laundrie. He had been dead for weeks. While the entire nation had been searching for him, while protesters had gathered outside his parents' home, while law enforcement had conned through the wilderness, Brian Laundrie had been lying dead in the swamp. The cause of death was later determined to be a gunshot wound to the head. The manner of death was ruled a suicide. A revolver was found near his remains. Investigators concluded that Brian had taken his own life shortly after entering the reserve. The discovery brought a mixture of emotions. For some, it was a relief. The manhunt was over. There would be no trial, no drawn-out legal battle, no opportunity for Brian to continue controlling the narrative. For others, it was frustrating. Brian would never be held accountable. He would never have to face Gabby's family. He would never have to answer for what he had done. And most importantly, he would never have to explain why. But the notebook he left behind would offer at least some answers. The FBI worked carefully to preserve and analyze the contents of the notebook. Water damage had made portions of it illegible, but several pages were still readable. The writing was Brian's. In the notebook, Brian confessed to killing Gabby, but his confession was not a straightforward admission of guilt. Instead, it was a self-serving narrative that attempted to paint his actions as justified, even noble. Brian wrote that Gabby had been injured. He claimed she had hurt herself somehow. He didn't specify exactly how, and that she was in pain, suffering. He claimed that he killed her to end that suffering, to spare her from prolonged agony. He framed it as an act of mercy. He wrote that he loved her, that he couldn't bear to see her in pain, that he had done what he thought was right. But investigators did not believe his story. The autopsy had revealed that Gabby died from manual strangulation. There were no injuries consistent with the kind of catastrophic accident that would necessitate a mercy killing. No broken bones. No life-threatening wounds. No indication that she was dying or in unbearable pain. What the evidence showed was that Brian had wrapped his hands around Gabby's neck and strangled her to death. This was not a mercy killing. It was murder. The notebook was Brian's final attempt to control how he would be remembered, to shape the story so that he appeared as something other than a killer. Even in death, he was manipulating the narrative. Forensic psychologists who analyzed the notebook pointed out that Brian's account was consistent with patterns seen in other domestic homicide cases. Abusers often justify their violence by claiming they were protecting the victim, helping them, or acting out of love. They reframe their actions to absolve themselves of responsibility. Brian's notebook was a textbook example of this, but the truth was clear. Brian Laundrie had murdered Gabby Petito. He had strangled her in a remote area of Wyoming. He had left her body in the wilderness. He had driven her van back to Florida. He had stayed silent while her family suffered. And when the pressure became too much, he had fled into the woods and taken his own life. The case was officially closed. The FBI confirmed that Brian Laundrie was the only suspect in Gabby's death, and that no other individuals were being investigated. For Gabby's family, the confirmation brought a painful kind of closure. They finally knew what had happened. They finally knew who was responsible. But the knowledge didn't ease the grief. It didn't bring Gabby back. Joe Petito, Gabby's father, spoke publicly after the notebook's contents were revealed. He was angry. He called Brian a coward. He said that Brian's so-called confession was a lie, a final insult to Gabby's memory. He said that Brian had killed Gabby in a fit of rage, and that the mercy-killing story was a desperate attempt to avoid being remembered as a monster. Nicole Schmidt echoed those sentiments. She said that Brian had taken everything from them, Gabby's life, the chance for justice, the opportunity to hear the truth. She said that she would never forgive him. But she also said that she wouldn't let anger consume her. She would focus on honoring Gabby's memory, on making sure that her daughter's death meant something. And that's exactly what Gabby's family did. In the wake of Gabby's death, the Petito and Schmidt families established the Gabby Petito Foundation. The foundation's mission was twofold: to provide resources and support to families of missing persons, and to raise awareness about domestic violence. The foundation partnered with organizations dedicated to helping victims of abuse. They funded search efforts for other missing persons. They worked to educate the public about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of intervention. Gabby's case had shone a spotlight on the issue of intimate partner violence in a way that few cases had before. Her story resonated with people because it was relatable. She wasn't a stranger living on the margins of society. She was a young woman who seemed happy, who had dreams, who was living a life that many people admired and aspired to. And yet, she had been killed by the person closest to her. The case forced people to confront uncomfortable truths. That abuse doesn't always look like bruises and black eyes. That abusers can be charming, calm, and convincing. That victims often blame themselves, minimize the abuse, and stay in dangerous relationships because they believe things will get better. Gabby's story also highlighted the failures of systems meant to protect people like her. The Moab Police Department came under intense scrutiny after the body cam footage was released. Critics argued that the officers had mishandled the situation, that they had failed to recognize the signs of domestic violence, and that they had let Gabby down. In response, the Moab Police Department commissioned an independent investigation into the incident. The investigation was conducted by an outside law enforcement consulting firm, and the findings were released in early 2022. The report concluded that the officers had made several critical errors. They had not properly investigated the incident as a potential domestic violence case. They had not followed Utah state law, which requires officers to make an arrest when there is probable cause to believe that an act of domestic violence has occurred. They had not adequately assessed the power dynamics in the relationship, or recognized that Gabby's behavior was consistent with that of a victim, not an aggressor. The report recommended additional training for officers in recognizing and responding to domestic violence, particularly in cases involving psychological and emotional abuse. The Moab City Police Chief issued a public statement acknowledging the findings. He expressed regret for the way the situation had been handled and committed to implementing the recommended changes. But for Gabby's family, the acknowledgement came too late. The case also reignited conversations about missing white woman syndrome. The term used to describe the disproportionate media attention given to cases involving young, white, middle-class women compared to cases involving women of color, indigenous women, or women from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. When Gabby Petito was reported missing, her case immediately went viral. News outlets covered around the clock. Social media users shared her photos and videos. Celebrities spoke out. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. But at the same time, countless other people were missing. According to the National Crime Information Center, there were over 90,000 active missing persons cases in the United States as of September 2021. Many of those cases received little to no media attention. Indigenous women, in particular, face a crisis of violence and disappearance that is often ignored by mainstream media. According to the National Institute of Justice, Indigenous women are murdered at a rate more than 10 times the national average, and yet, their cases rarely make headlines. Journalists, activists, and advocates pointed out this disparity during the Gabby Petito case. They urged the public to pay attention to all missing persons, not just those who fit a certain profile. They called for more equitable coverage, more resources for underserved communities, and systemic changes to address the root causes of violence against women. Gabby's family acknowledged these concerns. They used their platform to bring attention to other missing persons cases. They advocated for policy changes. They recognized that while Gabby's story had captured the nation's attention, countless other families were suffering in silence. The foundation that bears Gabby's name has worked to support those families, regardless of race, background, or socioeconomic status. It's a way of ensuring that Gabby's legacy is not just about her own tragic story, but about creating change for others. In the months following Gabby's death, new details continue to emerge. Investigators released additional information about the timeline, the evidence, and the investigation. Some of these details were heartbreaking, others were chilling. One particularly disturbing piece of information came from the autopsy report. The coroner revealed that Gabby's body had been left outdoors for an estimated 4 weeks before it was discovered. During that time, it had been exposed to wildlife, weather, and decomposition. The coroner also noted that strangulation is one of the most violent and personal forms of homicide. It requires the killer to be in close physical contact with the victim. It requires sustained effort, and it often indicates a high level of rage or a desire for control. In cases of intimate partner homicide, strangulation is particularly common. Studies have shown that non-fatal strangulation is a significant predictor of future lethal violence. In other words, if an abuser has strangled or attempted to strangle their partner before, the likelihood of them eventually killing that partner increases dramatically. There is no public evidence that Brian had previously strangled Gabby. But the Moab incident, the reports of controlling behavior, and the witness accounts of verbal aggression all pointed to a pattern of escalating abuse. It's likely that what happened in Wyoming was not a sudden, isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of a toxic relationship that had been deteriorating for some time. Another detail that emerged was related to Brian's mental state in the days following Gabby's death. The hitchhiking incidents, his erratic behavior, and his desperate attempts to distance himself from the Spread Creek area all suggested that he was panicking. But he was also calculating. He used Gabby's debit card to withdraw money. He drove her van across the country. He returned to his parents' home and immediately lawyered up. These were not the actions of someone who was completely unhinged. These were the actions of someone who was trying to avoid getting caught. Brian's family has remained largely silent throughout the entire ordeal. They did not speak to Gabby's family. They did not cooperate with investigators beyond what was legally required. They did not issue public statements expressing sympathy or regret. Their silence has been a source of immense pain for Gabby's family. In interviews, Gabby's parents have said that they believe the Laundries know more than they've said. They believe that Brian told his parents what happened, or at least hinted at it, and that his parents chose to protect him rather than help find Gabby. In September 2022, Gabby's parents filed a civil lawsuit against Brian's parents, Chris and Roberta Laundrie. The lawsuit alleged that the Laundries had knowledge of Gabby's death and had intentionally caused emotional distress to Gabby's family by refusing to share that information. The lawsuit cited several pieces of evidence, including the fact that the Laundries went on a camping trip with Brian shortly after he returned to Florida, and that they retained an attorney before Gabby was even reported missing. The lawsuit argued that these actions demonstrated that the Laundries knew something was wrong and chose to remain silent. The Laundries denied the allegations. Their attorney, Stephen Bertolino, argued that his clients had no obligation to speak to Gabby's family, and that their decision to remain silent was protected by their constitutional rights. The case went to court, and in 2023 a settlement was reached. The terms of the settlement were not disclosed, but Gabby's family released a statement saying that they were satisfied with the outcome. The lawsuit was never about money. It was about accountability. It was about making sure that the Laundries understood the pain they had caused by staying silent. For Gabby's family, the legal battles, the media attention, and the endless scrutiny have been exhausting. But they have continued to fight, not just for Gabby, but for others. They have lobbied for stronger domestic violence laws. They have pushed for better training for law enforcement. They have advocated for policies that would require officers to take domestic violence incidents more seriously, even when the victim appears to be the aggressor. One of the specific changes they've called for is related to lethality assessments, a tool used by law enforcement to evaluate the risk of future violence in domestic disputes. Research has shown that certain factors, such as strangulation, threats to kill, access to weapons, and controlling behavior, are strong predictors of lethal violence. Gabby's family has argued that officers should be trained to recognize these factors and take them seriously, even in situations where the victim is not asking for help. They've also called for more resources for victims of domestic violence. Shelters, counseling services, legal aid, and hotlines are all critically underfunded in many parts of the country. Gabby's family has worked to raise money for these organizations, ensuring that people in abusive relationships have somewhere to turn, and they've worked to educate the public through interviews, social media, and public speaking engagements. They've shared Gabby's story in the hopes that it will help others recognize the warning signs of abuse and seek help before it's too late. One of the most powerful aspects of their advocacy has been their willingness to be vulnerable. Gabby's mother, Nicole, has spoken openly about the guilt she feels. The guilt of not knowing what Gabby was going through, of not being able to protect her, of missing the signs. She's talked about the last conversation she had with Gabby, the text messages that seemed off, the nagging feeling that something was wrong. She said that she wishes she had pushed harder, asked more questions, demanded that Gabby come home. But she also knows that it's not her fault. The person responsible for Gabby's death was Brian Laundrie, and him alone. Joe Petito has also been vocal. He's talked about the anger he feels, the sense of injustice, the frustration of knowing that Brian will never face a jury. But he's also talked about the importance of channeling that anger into something productive, into creating change so that other families don't have to go through what his family has endured. Both parents have emphasized that Gabby was more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was a young woman with dreams and ambitions. She loved art, she loved travel, she loved life, and she deserved so much more than the ending she got. As the years have passed since Gabby's death, her case has remained in the public consciousness. Documentaries have been made. Podcasts have covered the story in exhaustive detail. Books have been written. Her case is frequently referenced in discussions about domestic violence, missing persons, and the criminal justice system. But for those who loved her, Gabby is not a headline. She's not a case study. She's a person they miss every single day. Her friends have shared memories of her. They've talked about her infectious laugh, her creativity, her kindness. They've shared photos from before the trip, images of Gabby smiling, happy, full of life. One friend recalled a time when Gabby had stayed up all night helping her prepare for an important presentation. Another remembered how Gabby would always check in, always ask how people were doing, always make sure everyone felt included. These are the moments that define who Gabby was. Not the way she died, but the way she lived. Her family has also worked to preserve her memory in tangible ways. They've held memorial services. They've created scholarship funds in her name. They've planted trees, dedicated benches, and established spaces where people can reflect and remember. On what would have been Gabby's birthday each year, Her family asked people to perform acts of kindness in her honor, to help a stranger, to donate to a cause, to reach out to someone who might be struggling. It's a way of keeping her spirit alive, of ensuring that her presence is still felt in the world. The Gabby Petito case has also had broader impacts on policy and legislation. In several states, lawmakers have introduced bills named after Gabby that aim to improve how domestic violence cases are handled. One such bill focuses on training for law enforcement, requiring officers to complete specialized courses on recognizing and responding to domestic abuse. Another bill seeks to strengthen protections for victims, making it easier for them to obtain restraining orders and access emergency resources. While these bills vary by state, the underlying goal is the same: to prevent another Gabby Petito, to ensure that the warning signs are recognized, to make sure that victims are protected and abusers are held accountable. Progress has been slow, but it's happening. And Gabby's family takes some comfort in knowing that their daughter's death has led to meaningful change. But there are still questions that haunt them. Questions that will likely never be fully answered. What were Gabby's final moments like? What did she say? What did she feel? Did she know what was about to happen? Did she try to escape? Did she call out for help? These are questions that Nicole and Joe think about late at night, when the world is quiet and the grief feels unbearable. They wonder if Gabby was scared, if she was in pain, if she suffered. The coroner has said that death by strangulation is not instantaneous. It can take several minutes. During that time, the victim is conscious, aware, and terrified. They fight for breath. They claw at the hands around their neck. They struggle until their body gives out. It's an agonizing way to die. Knowing this, knowing that Gabby's final moments were filled with fear and pain, is almost too much to bear. But Gabby's family has found strength in each other, and in the outpouring of support from around the world. Thousands of people have reached out to them with messages of sympathy, solidarity, and encouragement. Strangers have sent flowers, letters, donations. They've shared their own stories of surviving abuse, of losing loved ones, of finding hope in the midst of tragedy. This collective grief, this shared sense of loss, has created a community of people who are committed to making sure that Gabby's death was not in vain. And in some small way that helps. It doesn't bring Gabby back. It doesn't erase the pain. But it reminds her family that she mattered, that her life had meaning, that she will not be forgotten. The landscape of social media has also changed in the wake of Gabby's case. Influencers and content creators have become more aware of the dangers of romanticizing van life and nomadic lifestyles without acknowledging the challenges and risks involved. Gabby's carefully curated Instagram feed showed only the highlights, the sunsets, the smiling photos, the idyllic moments. But behind the scenes, she was struggling. Her relationship was toxic. She was isolated, far from home, without a clear way out. This dissonance between the public image and the private reality is something that many people can relate to. Social media often presents a filtered, idealized version of life, one that doesn't reflect the full truth. In Gabby's case, that disconnect may have prevented people from recognizing that she needed help. Her followers saw a happy, adventurous young woman. They didn't see the fear, the control, the escalating abuse. Since her death, there's been a push for more honesty and transparency on social media. Influencers are talking more openly about mental health, about relationship struggles, about the less glamorous aspects of travel and van life. They're encouraging their followers to check in on each other, to look beyond the surface, and to offer support to those who might be suffering in silence. It's a small shift, but it's an important one. The story of Gabby Petito is also a reminder that domestic violence can happen to anyone. It doesn't discriminate based on age, race, education, or socioeconomic status. It happens in quiet suburban neighborhoods and in bustling cities. It happens to people who seem confident and strong, and to people who seem vulnerable and dependent. Gabby was young, educated, and surrounded by people who loved her. But she was also in a relationship with someone who exerted control over her, who isolated her, and who ultimately killed her. Her story is not unique. Every year, thousands of women are killed by intimate partners. Domestic violence is one of the leading causes of death for women in the United States. But many of these cases don't get the attention that Gabby's did. They don't make headlines. They don't spark national conversations. Gabby's family has worked to use the platform that her case created to shine a light on these other stories. They've partnered with families of other victims. They've helped raise awareness about missing persons cases that have been overlooked. They've used their voice to advocate for those who don't have one. And they've done it all while carrying the unbearable weight of their own grief. The investigation into Gabby's death may be closed, but the search for answers continues in other ways. Experts in forensic psychology, criminology, and domestic violence have continued to analyze the case, trying to understand what drove Brian Laundrie to commit such a brutal act. They've examined his background, his behavior patterns, and the dynamics of his relationship with Gabby, searching for insights that might help prevent similar tragedies in the future. What emerged from these analyses was a portrait of a relationship marked by increasing toxicity, control, and emotional instability. Friends and acquaintances who knew Brian and Gabby during their time together have come forward with accounts that paint a more complete picture of their relationship. While many of these accounts came to light only after Gabby's death, they provide crucial context for understanding how things deteriorated so catastrophically. Several people described Brian as possessive and controlling. One friend recalled that Brian didn't like when Gabby spent time with her girlfriends without him. He would text her repeatedly when she was out, asking where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. At first, Gabby interpreted this as caring, as a sign that he loved her and worried about her. But over time, it became suffocating. Another acquaintance mentioned that Brian seemed to have strong opinions about what Gabby should wear, how she should present herself online, and even how she should interact with her followers on social media. He wanted control over her public image, over the way the world perceived both of them. This need for control is a common characteristic in abusive relationships. Abusers often start with small assertions of power, dictating what their partner wears, monitoring their phone, criticizing their friends, and gradually escalate to more severe forms of control. There were also indications that Brian struggled with his own mental health. Multiple sources mentioned that he experienced bouts of anxiety and paranoia. Gabby herself had told the Moab police officers that Brian sometimes heard voices and became agitated. It's important to note that mental illness alone does not cause someone to become abusive or violent. Millions of people live with anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions and never harm anyone. But when mental health issues are combined with other factors, such as a sense of entitlement, poor emotional regulation, and a belief system that devalues the autonomy of others, they can contribute to dangerous behavior. Brian's notebook writings, particularly his attempt to frame Gabby's murder as a mercy killing, also reveal something about his mindset. He saw himself as the hero of his own story, even in the aftermath of committing an unthinkable act. He couldn't or wouldn't accept full responsibility for what he had done. Instead, he constructed a narrative that absolved him, that painted him as someone who had acted out of love rather than rage. This kind of self-delusion is not uncommon among perpetrators of intimate partner violence. They rationalize their actions. They blame the victim. They claim they were provoked, or that they were trying to help, or that they lost control in a moment of passion. But the reality is that Brian Laundrie made a choice. He chose to put his hands around Gabby's neck. He chose to squeeze until she stopped breathing, and he chose to leave her body in the wilderness and run. The van life community, which had initially embraced Gabby and Brian as one of their own, was deeply shaken by the case. Van life had become increasingly popular in recent years, fueled by social media influencers who documented their travels and portrayed a lifestyle of freedom, adventure, and simplicity. But Gabby's death exposed the darker side of that lifestyle. Living in a small, confined space with another person for months can strain even the healthiest relationship. There's no privacy. There's no escape. Conflicts that might be minor in a traditional living situation can become amplified when you're trapped in a van together, miles from civilization. For people in abusive relationships, van life can be particularly dangerous. The isolation, the lack of resources, the distance from family and friends, All of these factors make it harder for victims to seek help or leave. After Gabby's case became public, several women in the van life community came forward with their own stories of experiencing abuse while on the road. Some described partners who became increasingly controlling once they were isolated in remote areas. Others talked about feeling trapped, unable to leave because they had no money, no vehicle of their own, and no nearby support system. These stories highlighted the need for greater awareness within the community about the risks of domestic violence and the importance of having safety plans in place. Some van life influencers began using their platforms to share resources for victims of abuse. They posted information about domestic violence lines, safety planning tools, and organizations that provide emergency assistance. They encouraged their followers to check in on friends who might be traveling with partners, to watch for warning signs, and to offer support without judgment. It was a shift in the culture, a recognition that the dream of van life could, for some, become a nightmare. The legal aftermath of Gabby's case extended beyond the criminal investigation. In addition to the civil lawsuit that Gabby's parents filed against the Laundries, there were also discussions about potential legal action against the Moab Police Department. Gabby's family consulted with attorneys about whether the police department could be held liable for failing to properly intervene during the August 12 encounter. Legal experts explained that such cases are difficult to win. Law enforcement agencies are generally protected by qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that shields officers from liability unless they violate clearly established constitutional rights. In this case, the officers had responded to a domestic dispute, separated the couple for the night, and followed the procedures they believed were appropriate at the time. While the independent investigation concluded that they had made errors, those errors were attributed to lack of training rather than intentional misconduct. Ultimately, Gabby's family decided not to pursue legal action against the Moab Police Department. Instead, they focused their efforts on advocating for systemic change, better training, clearer protocols, and a greater emphasis on victim safety in domestic violence situations. The Moab incident remains one of the most scrutinized aspects of the case. The body cam footage has been used in training sessions for law enforcement agencies around the country. It serves as a case study in what can go wrong when officers don't fully understand the dynamics of domestic abuse. Experts have pointed out several key moments in the footage where different decisions could have been made. For instance, when Gabby admitted to hitting Brian, the officers could have explored why she felt compelled to do so. They could have asked whether she felt safe. They could have assessed whether Brian's calm demeanor was genuine, or whether it was a performance designed to manipulate the situation. They also could have taken more seriously the witness report that Brian had been slapping Gabby. Instead, they focus on the physical evidence, the scratches on Brian's face, and assume that Gabby was the aggressor. This illustrates a common problem in domestic violence cases, the assumption that the person with physical injuries is the victim. In reality, victims of abuse often fight back. They scratch, hit, and shove in self-defense or out of desperation, and abusers are skilled at using these reactions against their victims, portraying themselves as the ones who have been wronged. If the Moab officers had been trained to recognize these patterns, the outcome might have been different. They might have separated Gabby and Brian for longer than one night. They might have connected Gabby with resources or encouraged her to reach out to family. They might have flagged the relationship as high risk and followed up in the days or weeks that followed. Of course, there's no way to know whether any of these interventions would have ultimately saved Gabby's life. Abusers are often most dangerous when they feel they're losing control, and separating a couple can sometimes escalate the violence. But what is clear is that the system failed to recognize the danger Gabby was in, and that failure had fatal consequences. In the broader context of domestic violence prevention, Gabby's case has been used to illustrate the importance of what experts call coercive control. Coercive control refers to a pattern of behavior in which an abuser uses tactics like intimidation, isolation monitoring, and emotional manipulation to dominate their partner. Unlike physical abuse, which leaves visible marks, coercive control is often invisible to outsiders. It happens behind closed doors. It's subtle. It builds over time. But research has shown that coercive control is one of the strongest predictors of violence in intimate relationships. People who experience coercive control are at significantly higher risk of being killed by their partners. In many countries, coercive control is now recognized as a form of domestic abuse and is criminalized. But in the United States, it remains a gray area. Some states have laws that address specific aspects of coercive control, such as stalking or harassment, but there's no comprehensive federal law. Advocates have called for the United States to follow the lead of countries like the United Kingdom, which passed legislation in 2015 making coercive control a criminal offense. Such a law would allow law enforcement to intervene earlier in abusive relationships, before the violence escalates to physical harm or death. Gabby's family has supported these efforts. They've argued that if coercive control had been recognized and taken seriously, Brian's behavior might have been flagged as dangerous long before the trip to Wyoming. The case has also prompted discussions about the role of bystanders in preventing domestic violence. Throughout Gabby and Brian's trip, multiple people witnessed concerning behavior. The witness who called 911 in Moab, the restaurant server who saw Brian berating Gabby, the hitchhikers who gave Brian a ride and noticed his erratic behavior. Each of these people took some action. They called the police. They came forward with information after the fact, but by the time their observations became relevant, it was too late. This raises difficult questions. What responsibility do bystanders have when they witness signs of abuse? Should they intervene? Should they call the police? Should they approach the victim directly? There are no easy answers. Intervening in domestic disputes can be dangerous. Victims may deny that anything is wrong, either because they're afraid of retaliation or because they're not ready to leave the relationship. And in some cases, outside intervention can make things worse, causing the abuser to escalate their behavior. But experts say that doing nothing is also a choice, and often the wrong one. Even small acts, like checking in with someone, offering resources, or simply letting them know that you're available to help, can make a difference. One organization that has worked to educate the public about bystander intervention is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They provide training on how to recognize signs of abuse, how to approach someone you're concerned about, and how to connect them with resources. They also emphasize the importance of believing victims. One of the most common reasons people don't seek help is that they fear they won't be believed or taken seriously. By creating a culture where victims feel safe coming forward, we can help save lives. Gabby's case has also highlighted the challenges faced by families of missing persons. When Gabby first went missing, her family felt helpless. They didn't know where she was, whether she was alive, or what had happened, and they faced resistance at every turn, from Brian and his family, who refused to cooperate, and from a system that wasn't designed to move quickly. In the United States, there is no waiting period to report someone missing. Contrary to popular belief, you don't have to wait 24 hours or 40 hours to file a report. But even when a report is filed, not all cases receive the same level of urgency or resources. High-profile cases like Gabby's often receive significant media attention and law enforcement resources. But thousands of other cases languish in obscurity, with families left to search on their own. The Gabby Petito Foundation has worked to address this disparity by providing financial assistance to families conducting their own searches. They funded search teams, bought equipment, and helped cover travel expenses for families trying to find their loved ones. They've also advocated for better coordination between law enforcement agencies. Missing persons cases often cross jurisdictional boundaries, and the lack of communication between agencies can hinder investigations. Gabby's family has called for the creation of a centralized database and improved protocols for sharing information. Another issue the case brought to light is the phenomenon of online sleuthing. As Gabby's case gained national attention, thousands of people on social media began conducting their own investigations. They analyzed her Instagram posts, studied Google Maps, watched YouTube videos, and shared theories. Some of this amateur detective work actually proved helpful. For instance, a TikTok user came forward with footage showing Gabby's van in the background of a video they had recorded, while visiting Grand Teton National Park. This footage helped narrow down the search area and ultimately led to the discovery of Gabby's body. But online sleuthing also had a dark side. Some people harassed Brian's family, showed up at their home and made threats. Others spread misinformation, accused innocent people of being involved, and turned the case into a spectacle. The FBI had to issue statements urging people to submit tips through official channels rather than posting them on social media. They warned that sharing unverified information could compromise the investigation and put people at risk. The phenomenon of internet sleuths becoming deeply involved in true crime cases is not new, but Gabby's case took it to another level. It raised questions about the ethics of online investigation, the boundaries of public participation, and the potential harms of turning real tragedies into entertainment. For Gabby's family, the intense public interest was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it kept Gabby's case in the headlines and put pressure on law enforcement to act quickly. On the other hand, it invaded their privacy, subjected them to constant scrutiny, and turned their grief into a public spectacle. They've spoken about the challenge of trying to mourn while living in the spotlight. Every statement they made was analyzed. Every interview was dissected. They couldn't grieve privately. They had to do it in front of millions of people. But they also recognized that the public's attention was a privilege that many other families don't receive. And they tried to use that attention to help others, even as they struggled with their own pain. As time has passed, the intensity of media coverage has diminished. Other stories have taken Gabby's place in the news cycle. The world has moved on, but for Gabby's family the pain remains. Birthdays are hard. Holidays are hard. The anniversary of her death is excruciating. They've talked about the little things they miss. Gabby's voice, her laugh, the way she used to text them random photos throughout the day. The plans they had made together that will never come to fruition. Nicole has spoken about the guilt that still haunts her. She replays conversations in her mind, wondering if she missed something, if she could have said or done something differently. She thinks about the text messages that seemed off, and she wishes she had pushed harder for answers. Joe has talked about the anger that still burns inside him. Anger at Brian for what he did. Anger at the Laundries for their silence. Anger at a system that didn't protect his daughter. But both parents have also talked about the importance of finding meaning in their loss. They've channeled their grief into action, into advocacy, into making sure that Gabby's death leads to positive change. And they've found solace in the knowledge that Gabby touched so many lives, even in death. People around the world have been inspired by her story. They've started conversations about domestic violence. They've checked in on friends they were worried about. They've donated to organizations that help victims of abuse. Gabby's face, her smile, her story. They've become symbols of a broader movement to end intimate partner violence and to protect those who are most vulnerable. The ripple effects of Gabby's case have reached far beyond her immediate family and community. Colleges and universities have incorporated her story into their orientation programs, using it to educate students about healthy relationships and the warning signs of abuse. High schools have invited speakers from domestic violence organizations to talk to students about consent, respect, and how to seek help if they or someone they know is in an unsafe relationship. Workplaces have implemented training programs to help employees recognize signs of domestic abuse among their colleagues and to provide resources for those who need help. And lawmakers have continued to introduce legislation aimed at strengthening protections for victims and improving the criminal justice system's response to domestic violence. One piece of legislation, proposed in Wyoming, would require law enforcement officers to complete specialized training in domestic violence dynamics before they can work in the field. Another bill introduced in Utah would mandate lethality assessments in all domestic dispute calls, ensuring that officers evaluate the risk of future violence before they leave the scene. These are concrete steps, small but significant, toward building a system that takes domestic violence seriously and prioritizes victim safety. The case has also influenced how social media platforms approach content related to violence and abuse. After Gabby's death, several platforms updated their policies to make it easier to report concerning content, to connect users with resources, and to remove glorifies or encourages violence. Instagram, in particular, launched a feature that allows users to reach out directly to friends they're worried about, providing resources and information about how to get help. The feature was developed in consultation with domestic violence experts and is designed to be discreet and non-intrusive. These changes are imperfect, and there's still much work to be done. But they represent a recognition that social media platforms have a role to play in protecting their users from harm. Meanwhile, the true crime community, podcasters, documentary filmmakers, writers, has grappled with the ethical implications of covering cases like Gabby's. There's a tension between the public's appetite for true crime content and the need to treat victims and their families with dignity and respect. Some creators have been criticized for exploiting Gabby's story for clicks and views, for turning her death into entertainment. Others have been praised for using their platforms to educate, to raise awareness, and to honor her memory. Gabby's family has been selective about which projects they support. They've participated in some documentaries and interviews, believing that sharing Gabby's story can help others, but they've also declined many requests, particularly from those who they felt were more interested in sensationalism than in meaningful storytelling. It's a difficult balance. They want Gabby's story to be told. They want people to know who she was, what happened to her, and why it matters. But they also want to protect her dignity and their own privacy. One documentary that the family did support was a project that focused not just on the crime, but on Gabby's life. It included home videos, interviews with friends and family, and footage of Gabby doing the things she loved, creating art, exploring nature, spending time with the people she cared about. The documentary painted a portrait of a vibrant, creative, compassionate young woman who had dreams and aspirations. It reminded viewers that Gabby was more than a victim. She was a person, and that's what her family wants people to remember. Not the horrific way she died, but the beautiful way she lived. In recent years, Gabby's family has also worked to establish memorials in places that were meaningful to her. In Blue Point, New York, where Gabby grew up, a memorial bench was placed in a local park. It bears a plaque with her name and the dates of her birth and death, along with a simple message, "Forever in our hearts." The bench has become a place where people come to reflect, to remember, and to honor Gabby's memory. Flowers are often left there. Notes are tucked into the cracks. It's a small, quiet tribute, but it means the world to her family. They've also supported the creation of a memorial scholarship in Gabby's name at a local school. The scholarship is awarded annually to a student who demonstrates creativity, compassion, and a commitment to making a positive difference in the world, qualities that Gabby embodied. These tangible reminders of Gabby's life help keep her spirit alive. They ensure that she's remembered not just as a victim, but as someone who had value, who made an impact, who mattered. As we move further away from the immediate aftermath of Gabby's death, the question becomes, what have we learned? What has changed, and what still needs to be done? In some ways, Gabby's case has sparked meaningful progress. There's greater awareness of domestic violence. There's more conversation about warning signs. There's increased funding for victim services in some areas. But in other ways, the same problems persist. Women are still being killed by intimate partners at alarming rates. Law enforcement agencies are still under-resourced and under-trained. Victims are still falling through the cracks. The statistics are sobering. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. That's more than 10 million people per year. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence, sexual violence, or stalking in their lifetimes. And every day, on average, 3 women are murdered by a current or former intimate partner. Gabby Petito was one of those women. But she was not the first, and tragically she will not be the last. The question is, what are we willing to do about it? Are we willing to fund shelters and support services so that victims have somewhere safe to go? Are we willing to train law enforcement officers so they can recognize the signs of abuse and intervene effectively? Are we willing to pass laws that hold abusers accountable and protect victims? Are we willing to have difficult conversations with our friends, our family members, our colleagues when we see warning signs? Are we willing to believe victims when they come forward? These are the questions that Gabby's case forces us to confront, and the answers will determine whether her death leads to lasting change or becomes just another tragic story that fades from memory. Gabby's family is committed to making sure it's the former. They continue to work tirelessly, even as they carry the weight of their grief. They speak at events, they meet with lawmakers, they support other families. They keep Gabby's name alive, and they do it because they believe that no one else should have to go through what they've been through. No other parent should have to bury their child because of intimate partner violence. No other family should have to search for answers while the person responsible stays silent. They do it because they believe in the power of one voice, one story to make a difference. And they do it because they love Gabby, and they always will. The legacy of Gabby Petito extends into unexpected corners of society, touching people and institutions in ways that continue to unfold. Her case became a catalyst not just for awareness, but for examining the very structures meant to protect people from harm. In the aftermath of her death, researchers and academics began studying the case from multiple angles. Sociologists examined the role of social media in shaping public perception and mobilizing collective action. Criminologists analyzed the investigative techniques used to locate Gabby's remains and track Brian's movements. Psychologists explored the dynamics of the relationship and the patterns of behavior that preceded the homicide. One university created an entire course around the case, using it as a framework for teaching students about domestic violence, media ethics, criminal justice, and social inequality. The course examined not just what happened to Gabby, but why her case received so much attention while others didn't, and what that says about our society's values and biases. Students in the course analyzed the body cam footage, read transcripts of witness interviews, studied the timeline of events, and discussed what could have been done differently at various intervention points. They grappled with difficult questions about personal responsibility, systemic failures, and the role of bystanders. The course proved to be emotionally challenging for many students, particularly those who had personal experience with domestic violence. But it also proved to be transformative. Students reported that it changed the way they thought about relationships, about warning signs, about their own responsibility to look out for others. Some students who took the course went on to volunteer at domestic violence shelters, to pursue careers in social work or victim advocacy, or to become activists working to change laws and policies. Gabby's story had inspired them to take action. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies across the country began re-examining their protocols for responding to domestic violence calls. The Moab incident had exposed critical gaps in training and procedure, and departments didn't want to repeat those mistakes. Some agencies brought in domestic violence experts to conduct comprehensive reviews of their policies. Others partnered with local advocacy organizations to develop new training programs. Still others implemented mandatory lethality assessments for all domestic dispute calls, ensuring that officers evaluate the risk of future violence before leaving the scene. One police department in Colorado created a specialized domestic violence response unit, consisting of officers with advanced training in trauma-informed interviewing, risk assessment, and victim safety planning. When a domestic violence call comes in, this unit responds alongside regular patrol officers, providing specialized expertise and ensuring that victims are connected with resources. The unit has been credited with preventing several potential homicides by identifying high-risk situations early and taking aggressive action to protect victims. It's become a model that other departments are now studying and replicating. In Utah, the state where the Moab incident occurred, lawmakers passed legislation requiring all law enforcement officers to complete a minimum number of hours of domestic violence training every year. The training must cover topics like recognizing coercive control, understanding trauma responses, assessing lethality risk, and safely separating couples in crisis. The legislation was nicknamed Gabby's Law by advocates, though the official name is different. Regardless of what it's called, It represents a concrete step toward ensuring that officers are better equipped to handle domestic violence situations. The National Domestic Violence Hotline also saw a significant increase in calls and web traffic after Gabby's case became public. In the weeks following her disappearance and death, call volume surged by more than 40%. Many callers mentioned Gabby's story specifically, saying that it had prompted them to reach out for help. Some callers were victims who had been in abusive relationships for years but had never sought help before. Gabby's story had given them the courage to take that first step. Others were friends or family members of people they feared were in danger, looking for guidance on how to help. The hotline had to bring on additional staff and volunteers to handle the influx. But they also recognized it as a sign that the conversation around domestic violence was changing, that people were becoming more aware and more willing to seek help. One particularly poignant call came from a young woman who said she had been planning a cross-country van trip with her boyfriend. She had been excited about it, had been documenting their preparations on social media, just like Gabby. But as she watched Gabby's story unfold, she began to recognize troubling similarities in her own relationship. Her boyfriend had been controlling. He monitored her phone. He didn't like when she spent time with friends. He had been pressuring her to quit her job so they could leave for the trip sooner, which would have made her financially dependent on him. She had dismissed these concerns, telling herself that he just loved her, that he was excited about their adventure together. But Gabby's case had opened her eyes. She realized that the warning signs were there, and she made the difficult decision to end the relationship and cancel the trip. She told the hotline counselor that Gabby's story had saved her life. She believed that if she had gone on that trip, she might have ended up like Gabby. The counselor helped her create a safety plan, connected her with local resources, and encouraged her to reach out if she needed further support. The young woman thanked her and hung up. It's impossible to know how many other people made similar decisions, how many recognized themselves or their relationships in Gabby's story and took action to protect themselves. But anecdotal evidence suggests that the number was significant. Domestic violence shelters reported increased demand for services. Therapists specializing in trauma and relationship issues saw their caseloads grow. Legal aid organizations that help victims obtain restraining orders received more requests for assistance. All of this pointed to a broader awakening, a moment when people who had previously suffered in silence felt empowered to speak up, to seek help, to change their circumstances. But awareness and action are not the same thing as prevention. And while Gabby's case led to important conversations and some meaningful changes, it also exposed how far we still have to go. The reality is that domestic violence is deeply rooted in societal structures that normalize male dominance, excuse aggressive behavior, and blame victims for their own victimization. Changing these structures requires more than just training programs and hotlines. It requires a fundamental shift in cultural attitudes. It requires teaching children from a young age about healthy relationships, about consent, about respect. It requires challenging the toxic masculinity that tells boys they need to be tough, dominant, in control. It requires dismantling the belief systems that treat women as property, as objects to be controlled rather than people with autonomy and agency. These are not easy tasks. They can't be accomplished overnight. But they're essential if we want to create a world where cases like Gabby's are the rare exception, rather than a depressingly common occurrence. Gabby's family has been vocal about the need for this kind of systemic change. They've spoken at schools, at conferences, at legislative hearings, advocating not just for better responses to domestic violence, but for prevention efforts that address the root causes. They've supported programs that teach young people about healthy relationships, that provide mentoring and support for at-risk youth, that challenge harmful gender norms and promote equality and respect. They've also emphasized the importance of economic empowerment for women. One of the factors that keeps many people trapped in abusive relationships is financial dependence. If you can't afford to leave, if you have no money of your own, if your abuser controls all the finances, escaping becomes nearly impossible. Programs that help women gain financial literacy, develop job skills, and achieve economic independence are crucial tools in the fight against domestic violence. The Gabby Petito Foundation has provided grants to organizations that offer these services, recognizing that safety and economic security go hand in hand. Another area where Gabby's case has had an impact is in the conversation around gun violence and domestic abuse. Research has consistently shown that the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation dramatically increases the risk of homicide. Women in abusive relationships are 5 times more likely to be killed if their abuser has access to a gun. While Gabby was not killed with a gun, Brian took his own life with one, and the ease with which he was able to obtain and carry a firearm, even as he fled from law enforcement, raised questions about gun regulations and domestic violence. Advocates have called for stronger laws that prohibit individuals with histories of domestic violence from possessing firearms. Some states have enacted such laws, but enforcement is inconsistent, and there are significant loopholes. For instance, many domestic violence restraining orders don't automatically trigger a requirement to surrender firearms. Even when they do, there's often no mechanism to ensure compliance. Abusers can simply lie about whether they own guns, and there's no follow-up. Federal law prohibits people convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors from owning guns, but this only applies to current or former spouses, cohabitants, or those who share a child. It doesn't cover dating partners, a loophole that leaves many victims unprotected. Closing these loopholes and strengthening enforcement could save lives. Gabby's family has supported efforts to pass comprehensive gun safety legislation that addresses the intersection of firearms and domestic violence. The case has also influenced how we think about digital evidence and privacy in the age of social media. Gabby's online presence, her Instagram posts, her YouTube videos, her text messages, became critical pieces of evidence in the investigation. They helped establish a timeline, revealed the state of her relationship, and provided clues about her whereabouts. But the use of digital evidence also raised privacy concerns. Law enforcement accessed Gabby's accounts, read her private messages, analyzed her location data. This was done with the goal of finding her and solving the case, and most people agreed it was justified under the circumstances. But it also highlighted how much of our lives is now digital, how much data we generate every day, and how easily that data can be accessed by others. It raised questions about what happens to our digital identities when we die, who has the right to access them, and how that information can be used. Some jurisdictions have since enacted laws clarifying the rights of families to access the digital accounts of deceased loved ones. Others have developed protocols for how law enforcement can request and use digital evidence in missing persons and homicide cases, balancing the need for information with respect for privacy. The case also demonstrated the power of crowdsourcing in investigations. The dashcam footage that helped locate Gabby's remains came from ordinary travelers who happened to be in the right place at the right time, and who came forward with their footage after seeing news coverage. Social media users analyzed Gabby's Instagram posts, identified locations based on landmarks in the background, and created detailed maps of her likely route. Some of this information proved useful to investigators. This kind of public participation in criminal investigations is a relatively new phenomenon, enabled by technology and social media. It has both benefits and drawbacks. On the positive side, it can generate leads, provide evidence, and keep cases in the public eye. On the negative side, it can spread misinformation, interfere with official investigations, and violate people's privacy. Finding the right balance is an ongoing challenge. Law enforcement agencies have had to adapt to this new reality, learning how to harness the power of public engagement while managing the risks. The FBI and other agencies now have dedicated teams that monitor social media for tips and leads in major cases. They've developed protocols for verifying information, filtering out noise, and following up on credible tips. They've also worked to educate the public about the best ways to submit information and the importance of not taking matters into their own hands. In Gabby's case, the public's involvement was largely positive. It helped find her. It kept the case in the spotlight. It put pressure on Brian and his family. But in other cases, online SOVs have caused harm, harassing innocent people, spreading conspiracy theories, and interfering with investigations. It's a reminder that while technology and social media can be powerful tools for justice, they can also be weapons. How we use them matters. As the first anniversary of Gabby's death approached, her family organized a series of events to honor her memory and continue raising awareness about domestic violence. They held a memorial service inviting friends, family, and members of the community to come together to remember Gabby and to reflect on the importance of preventing violence. The service included music, readings, and speeches from people who had known Gabby and from advocates working to end domestic violence. It was emotional, heartbreaking, and beautiful. People shared stories about Gabby, her kindness, her creativity, her dreams. They laughed. They celebrated her life. The family also organized a fundraising walk, with proceeds going to the Gabby Petito Foundation and to local domestic violence organizations. Hundreds of people participated, wearing blue and orange, colors that had become associated with Gabby's case. They walked together, holding signs with messages of hope, awareness, and remembrance. At the end of the walk, Gabby's father addressed the crowd. He thanked everyone for coming, for caring, for refusing to let Gabby's death be in vain. He talked about the progress that had been made over the past year, the laws that had been passed, the training programs that had been implemented, the lives that had been saved, but he also acknowledged how much work remained. He urged people engaged to keep the conversation going, to continue pushing for change. He reminded them that every victim of domestic violence deserves the same attention, the same resources, the same justice that Gabby's case had received. He ended with a message that resonated with everyone present. Gabby would want us to help others. She would want our story to make a difference. So let's honor her by doing exactly that. The crowd erupted in applause. Many were in tears. But there was also a sense of determination, of collective commitment to carrying forward Gabby's legacy. In the months that followed, the foundation launched several new initiatives. One was a scholarship program for students pursuing degrees in social work, counseling, or related fields, with the goal of supporting the next generation of professionals who will work with victims of violence and trauma. Another was a grant program for grassroots organizations working to prevent domestic violence in underserved communities. The foundation recognized that large, well-funded organizations often receive the most attention and resources, while smaller groups doing critical work on the ground struggle to survive. The grant program aimed to address that imbalance. The foundation also partnered with a tech company to develop a safety app for people in potentially dangerous relationships. The app allows users to discreetly alert trusted contacts if they feel unsafe, to document incidents of abuse, and to access resources and information. It's designed to be hidden on the user's phone so that an abusive partner won't discover it. The app has been downloaded thousands of times and has already been credited with helping several people escape dangerous situations. It's a small tool, but it has the potential to save lives. Gabby's family has also worked to build relationships with the families of other victims. They've reached out to parents, siblings, and children who have lost loved ones to intimate partner violence, offering support, solidarity, and shared understanding. These connections have been both heartbreaking and healing. Heartbreaking because they're a reminder of how many people have suffered similar losses. Healing because they create a community of people who understand the pain, who can offer comfort and strength to one another. One mother whose daughter was killed by an ex-boyfriend reached out to Gabby's family, thanking them for their advocacy work. She said that her daughter's case had received almost no media attention, that law enforcement had been slow to respond, and that she had felt alone in her grief and her fight for justice. But Gabby's case had given her hope. It had shown her that change was possible, that people cared, that she wasn't alone. And the foundation's work had directly helped her. They had connected her with a victim advocate, helped fund a search for evidence, and supported her through the legal process. Stories like this are what keep Gabby's family going. They're what make the difficult work feel worthwhile. They're proof that Gabby's death, as tragic and senseless as it was, has led to something meaningful. But there are also moments when the weight of it all feels unbearable. Moments when the grief crashes over them like a wave, when the unfairness of it all is too much to bear, when they just want their daughter back and nothing else matters. Nicole has spoken about these moments. She's talked about the days when she can barely get out of bed, when the simplest tasks feel impossible, when the absence of Gabby is so overwhelming that it's hard to breathe. She's talked about the anger that still flares up unexpectedly, anger at Brian, at his family, at the world for continuing to turn when her daughter's world is stopped. And she's talked about the guilt that never fully goes away, the voice in her head that whispers, "You should have known. You should have done something." Therapists and grief counselors have assured her that these feelings are normal, that there was nothing she could have done, that Brian alone is responsible for what happened. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. Joe has his own struggles. He's talked about the nightmares that wake him up in the middle of the night, the visions of what Gabby's final moments might have been like. He's talked about the helplessness he feels, the inability to protect his daughter even though that's what fathers are supposed to do. But both parents have also found ways to channel their pain into purpose. They've learned that grief doesn't go away, but it can be transformed. It can be used to fuel action, to drive change, to create meaning out of loss. And they've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. They don't want to move on from Gabby. They want to carry her with them, to keep her memory alive, to make sure that she's never forgotten. The relationship between Gabby's family and the Laundrie family remains non-existent. There has been no reconciliation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain that the Laundrie's silence caused. The civil lawsuit that Gabby's parents filed was settled, but the terms were not disclosed, and both sides agreed not to speak publicly about it. The settlement brought a legal conclusion to that aspect of the case, but it didn't bring closure in any emotional sense. Gabby's family has made it clear that they believe the Laundries knew more than they admitted, that they prioritized protecting their son over helping find Gabby, and that their actions caused unnecessary suffering. The Laundries, through their attorney, have maintained that they did nothing wrong, that they were simply exercising their legal rights, and that they're grieving the loss of their son. Whether the truth will ever fully emerge remains to be seen. But for now, the divide between the two families is absolute. Gabby's siblings have also struggled in the aftermath of her death. They've had to navigate their own grief while watching their parents suffer. They've had to see their sister's face everywhere, on the news, on social media, in documentaries and articles, and deal with the strange experience of having a private tragedy become a public spectacle. One of Gabby's brothers has spoken about the difficulty of returning to school after her death, of trying to focus on classes and homework when his world had just been shattered. He said that people didn't know how to talk to him, that some avoided him out of awkwardness, while others asked insensitive questions or made thoughtless comments. He said that he wished people understood that he wasn't just the brother of that girl who was killed. He was a person with his own identity, his own grief, his own needs. And while he appreciated people's concern, he also needed space to process what had happened. Gabby's sister has talked about the anger she feels when people romanticize Gabby's story, when they turn it into a tragic love story or use it for entertainment. She said that Gabby wasn't a character in a movie. She was a real person. And what happened to her wasn't romantic or poetic. It was violent and wrong. She's also talked about the fear that now colors her own relationships. She finds herself watching for warning signs, questioning whether someone's behavior is normal or concerning, second, guessing her instincts. Gabby's death has changed the way she sees the world. All of this speaks to the ripple effects of violence, the way it touches not just the direct victim but everyone around them. Families, friends, communities, everyone is impacted. Everyone carries a piece of the trauma. And that's why prevention is so important. Because the cost of violence is not just measured in the lives lost, but in the countless lives forever changed. As time has passed, the intense media focus on Gabby's case has faded. New stories have captured the public's attention. The news cycle has moved on. But for those working in domestic violence prevention, Gabby's case remains a touchstone, a reference point, a reminder of what's at stake. Trainers use the MOB body cam footage in their workshops. Advocates cite Gabby's story when lobbying for new legislation. Researchers include her case in their studies of intimate partner homicide. She's become part of the ongoing conversation about how we, as a society, respond to domestic violence. And hopefully her story will continue to drive progress for years to come. But there's also a risk that comes with cases like Gabby's becoming so well known. The risk is that they become seen as exceptional, as outliers, rather than as representative of a much larger problem. Gabby's case received attention because she was young, white, photogenic, and active on social media. Her story fit a narrative that the media and the public find compelling. But the reality is that women are killed intimate partners every single day, and most of those cases never make the news. Black women, Indigenous women, Latina women, Asian women, transgender women, they all face domestic violence at rates that are equal to or higher than white women. But their cases rarely receive the same attention, the same resources, the same urgency. This disparity is not just unfair. It's deadly. When cases don't receive media attention, there's less pressure on law enforcement to act quickly. There are fewer tips from the public. There's less funding for search efforts. And families are left to navigate the system alone, without the support that comes from widespread awareness. Gabby's family has tried to use their platform to address this inequality. They've spoken out about other cases. They've donated to organizations working with marginalized communities. They've tried to ensure that the attention Gabby's case received translates into broader change that benefits everyone. But they also recognize that they can't fix systemic racism and inequality on their own. That requires sustained effort from media organizations, law enforcement agencies, policymakers, and society as a whole. It requires asking hard questions about why we value some lives more than others and committing to doing better. As we reach the end of Gabby's story, it's important to remember what we started with: a young woman with dreams, with talents, with people who loved her. She wanted to see the world. She wanted to create art. She wanted to inspire others. She didn't deserve what happened to her. No one does. Brian Laundrie took her life in a moment of violence that can never be undone. He stole her future, her possibilities, her chance to grow old, to achieve her dreams, to experience all the joys and sorrows that make up a human life. And then he took his own life, escaping accountability, leaving behind only questions and a self-serving narrative that no one believes. The case is closed. The investigation is over. There will be no trial, no verdict, no public reckoning. But the work continues. Gabby's family continues to honor her memory through action. They continue to support victims, to advocate for change, to tell her story in the hope that it will save lives. Domestic violence organizations continue their work, often with limited resources and overwhelming demand, trying to provide safety and support to those who need it most. Law enforcement agencies continue to improve their training and protocols, learning from past mistakes, striving to do better. And individuals, people like you, people listening to this story right now, continue to have the power to make a difference. By recognizing warning signs, by checking in on friends and loved ones, by believing victims, by speaking up when something doesn't feel right. Gabby's story is a tragedy, but it doesn't have to be meaningless. Every life saved because someone recognized the signs of abuse and intervened. That's Gabby's legacy. Every law passed that strengthens protections for victims. That's Gabby's legacy. Every person who escapes a dangerous relationship because they saw themselves in her story. That's Gabby's legacy. She wanted to make the world a better place. She wanted to inspire people. She wanted her life to matter. And in death, she has done exactly that. The sun sets over the Grand Tetons, casting long shadows across the landscape where Gabby's body was found. The wilderness is beautiful and indifferent, unchanging despite the tragedy that unfolded there. But the people who loved Gabby have changed. The systems meant to protect people like her are changing, slowly but surely. And the conversation about domestic violence has shifted in meaningful ways. Gabby Petito will not be forgotten. Her face, her smile, her story, they've become part of our collective consciousness, a reminder of the cost of violence and the importance of vigilance, compassion, and action. Her family carries her memory forward, transforming grief into purpose, pain into progress. And somewhere, perhaps, another young person sees the warning signs in their own relationship and makes the decision to leave. Another family member reaches out to someone they're worried about. Another officer responds to a domestic violence call with greater awareness and sensitivity. These moments, small, individual, often invisible, are how change happens. They're how we honor the dead by protecting the living. Gabby wanted to inspire people. She wanted to show them that life was an adventure worth living. That beauty existed everywhere if you knew where to look. That courage meant following your dreams even when it scared you. She didn't get to finish her journey. Her adventure was cut short in the most brutal way. But those who loved her have taken up that journey in her name. They're fighting to make the world safer, kinder, more just. They're working to ensure that Gabby's death leads to lives saved, to families kept whole, to futures protected. This is Gabby Petito's story. A story of dreams and tragedy, of love and violence, of loss and legacy. May her memory be a blessing. May her story be a catalyst for change. And may we all do better, be better, her honor. Thank you for listening. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-900-733. Help is available. You are not alone. If you enjoyed this case, leave a comment and subscribe. Good night and stay safe.